Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. While it is true, as the slogan suggests, that it takes a village, a greater truth is that it takes many villages and some countryside to make a thriving region. We'll be taking a special look at our region tonight and hearing from reporters who cover the patchwork. Joining us are Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, and from the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Blake Paterson, Jefferson Parish reporter, Sarah Pagones, the North Shore's bureau chief, and Faimon Roberts, rural affairs reporter, all for the paper. And we're going to go to E first. And you wanted to sort of give us the distinction about parish governments as opposed to municipal governments, etc.
You just kind of briefly set it up. There are 64 parishes in Louisiana, and different parishes are structured different way. I think it depends mostly if they're more urban or if they're more rural parishes or historic considerations. Orleans Parish is a big exception in that Orleans Parish and the city of New Orleans are the same thing. And there is really no parish government per se in Orleans Parish. The city government is run, so there's no parish president of Orleans Parish. It would be the mayor. Now, some positions like sheriff are technically parish positions, but that's just an accounting thing. And so Orleans is more of an entity in itself. Jefferson Parish, it's a big parish, and it has several incorporated cities in Jefferson Parish. The ones that you think of are Gretna, Harahan, Kenner, Westwego, and Grand Isle. And these, for historical reasons, were incorporated. They have that council and their mayor. What is not incorporated, and that people think would be, is Metairie. Don't go looking for the mayor of Metairie, all right? But it would be one of the largest cities in the state if it was incorporated. And St. Tammany Parish is pretty much the same thing, where you have this parish government, and you have a few incorporated towns. You have a lot of places that are really census designations, more than cities. Mm-hmm. A quick story, I remember several years ago, I was working at the East Bank Guide, and we got a call one day that the police department was missing in Harahan. Now, usually, you get calls that the police get calls that people are missing. But a lady called, the police department's missing. Well, we looked around, and it turns out that the police chief, who's like the police chief, had decided to take the police department out to session, on the Gulf Coast. And so they had the sheriff's office that was doing it, which is another difference, is that some parishes really essentially have two police departments. You got the Kenner Police Department and the Harahan Police Department. Then you also have the Sheriff's Police Department too. Right. And so most parishes have elected officials who run their police, whereas in Orleans Parish, the police chief is appointed by the mayor. So there's different structures in different ways. Baton Rouge, it's the chief executive is called the mayor president. Mm-hmm. Because East Baton Rouge Parish is mostly the city of Baton Rouge, but there are a couple of towns like Zachary and Baker, which aren't part of Baton Rouge, but they're in the parish. And so the chief executive is the mayor and the president.
Okay, all right, that's our good civics lesson now for our state and our region. So, looking at the regional parishes and what's going on in each of them, we're going to start with what we call North Shore. We'll St. Tammany and go over to Sarah with that. And post-Katrina, boy, there has been a population boom over there in St. Tammany, and with it, some good things, absolutely, but also some pressures and problems that the population has had to face. So let's get going with that.
Well, the building of the causeway, of course, is what started it all off, and it just hasn't slowed down. And as you say, Katrina really did pour some gasoline on that. So we're growing. We're feeling the growing pressures in terms of strain, not just on roads, which you see in the traffic jams, and schools where they're pretty crowded, lots of portables at schools, but then also even water and sewerage. So you're having a lot of impact on the things that people expect for quality of life.
And what about public safety? And and with that, I'm leading into an issue with the DA's office. They need some funding, and they're trying desperately to get it, including going to court.
That's true. I mean, we have a growing parish, but it seems to be growing with people who don't like to pay taxes, and they've voted them down multiple times, refusing to renew a tax for the jail and the courthouse. And so this last year, when the budget was prepared for 2022, they cut the DA's budget in half. And now they're going to court. They'll be in court next week to decide does the parish have to fund them to the level that they want to be funded? And interestingly enough, it was Walter Reed that that kind of wrote the text on this, because he sued Washington Parish a number of years ago because of the same kind of issue, and prevailed. So I guess what it comes down to is what is a reasonable and necessary cost.
But they also voted down the casino in Slidell.
They did.
Which could have made up for some of the tax money that you're not getting.
That's true, and it was interesting because while the thing was going to be in Slidell, it was a lot of Western St. Tammany people that voted against it, because they were convinced that if they opened the door to a casino, that would mean a flood of them.
So you mentioned Walter Reed. I mean, for a while there, we just saw a spate of public officials there in St. Tammany Parish, going to court and going to prison, getting convicted, but things seem to have quieted down.
Yeah, I don't think anybody else is the target of an investigation right now. If they are, I hope that some of my sources will let me know. But even the first one, which was Peter Galvan, the coroner, that chicken's kind of coming home to roost, because the legislature passed a bill to take sort of oversight of the finances away from the coroner. The new coroner is like saying, I want it back, so the legislature undid it. But now there's a squabble between the parish and the coroner about the property that they have to give back, and that's also heading to court.
Okay. So I know another issue that, we're not too far away from recent elections, and that was a lot of school board members. And the business community has really gotten a lot more active now about the school system. St. Tammany school system has been cracked up to be one of the best in the state. But there's some concern that maybe it's slipping a few notches?
Well, they have gone from 4th to, in 2019, to 18th. I think the most recent report card maybe even slipped a little bit more than that. So yeah, the North Shore Business Council, which is a pretty influential business group, they commissioned a study to kind of look at what the problems are, and they asked candidates running to take a pledge to fix it. So that's kind of new. It's reminiscent of what happened in Jefferson Parish a number of years ago.
So the pandemic had to have had an impact. It did statewide on school scores.
That's true, but it kind of had happened before and is still happening. So.
How about the traffic, especially when you come off the causeway and going in towards Covington? Have they gotten worse, or is there any plan to fix it? Or?
There's, well, part of the problem is that, there's been work on I-12. It's wrapping up, but there's that pesky little drawbridge in Madisonville that backs up the traffic on 22, and that affects everybody. It doesn't just affect Madisonville.
It's a great drawbridge.
Yeah, nobody wants to see it. It's picturesque, right? But it is. They're talking about putting in more roundabouts and things like that. Some people think that building another high school would help, because it would take some of that traffic off the road. But I don't think that that's actually in the plans.
Is the parish still experiencing pretty intense, rapid population growth like it did post-Katrina? Is it still happening?
I don't think it's as intense as it was, but it hasn't gone away. It's still growing. I don't know what the projections are. I think they're saying maybe another 30,000 people by the next census. That may not be correct, but they are expecting growth to continue.
And property values are kind of holding, or are they going up, would you say?
I don't really know what the answer to that is. I know that for a while there, they were concerned that there was talk of a building moratorium, and home builders were really concerned that they were going to run out of stock. So at least at that point, people were still wanting to move and buy houses. Now with the flood insurance going up and
of course interest rates.
Yeah, it may have cooled that a little bit.
St. Tammany is usually what's referred to as a bedroom community. It's the kind of place where you go home and relax and get away from. If it's still that opinion, I mean, you still get the feeling of the
It
the
depends
bedroom,
on who you talk to. People who live there, residents say, yeah, this is a bedroom community. We don't want to see industrial growth. We don't want to see a lot of emphasis on economic projects. But if you talk to the economic development people, they say it hasn't been a bedroom community for a very long time. So.
And the zoning issues, and in terms of industrial growth, that's been controversial over there too.
It has. There was an effort to bring in more warehousing, Amazon-type businesses, and that's really not gone over very well with some of the more vocal people who are skeptical of growth and concerned about the impact not just on roads but on drainage. It's really a coastal parish in many respects, and all the growth and all the slabs poured has an effect on drainage.
Right. Well, St. Tammany, we love it, and it's a big part of our region. All right, thanks a lot, Sarah. Now let's talk about Jefferson Parish. And Jefferson Parish is is it still the most populous parish in the state, or has East Baton Rouge Parish taken over?
I
mean,
believe
they
it's
kind of
the
run close
second.
to close. It's second now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so still, pretty densely populated, particularly in the east bank of Jefferson Parish. But we've seen also that population, and I will speak from personal experience because I'm one of them, we're aging. And that's been a concern of parish officials, is trying to literally inject new blood into the parish. So what's the talk for that? What kind of plans do they have to do that, would you say?
Well, part of what we've seen lately is these efforts to sort of right-size these institutions that were built up sort of during that rapid growth. So one of the things more recently was the parish president, Cynthia Lee Shane, coming out with a proposal to sort of reimagine, as she called it, the playgrounds in the parish. We looked at some census data, and there were about, if you look at sort of 2020 compared to 1980, there are 44,000 fewer children, people under 18, in Jefferson Parish today than there were 40 years ago. And so what you have is you had a parish that built up. At this point, I think they have 27 playgrounds. It's a very sprawling, program, and sort of the parish president trying to figure out, what is the most economical way to sort of manage this and bring it into 2022.
And so, go ahead, E.
Isn't the parish running out of space for development too? I mean, can there be more residential areas in Jefferson Parish?
I think on the West Bank, there for some time there's been interest to sort of spur growth around the Avondale area. The sort of business development group called JEDCO has a sort of an incubator out there, and there's property around there that's undeveloped that they've, I think, been hoping for a while to sort of spur growth.
Right, and the new and improved UEP Long Bridge also is looked to, hopeful at any rate that would spur that kind of economic development. Jefferson Parish is really sort of it's a broad-ranging parish. It goes to around the south shore of Lake Pontchartrain, then all the way to the Gulf of Mexico with Grand Isle. So there are different types of problems that the parish officials have to tackle with that kind of geographic range.
Yeah, certainly. The East Bank is certainly more built out, and there's not much sort of open space, of course, to grow. The West Bank, of course, there is a lot more undeveloped land, and so, yeah, there are a lot of different concerns between the two. And there is a rivalry between the two banks that you often see sometimes.
Right, the best bank, as they like to be called on the West Bank, right? So, Faimon, I know that you covered Jefferson Parish for a while, too,
yes.
And we've seen some plans and projects by parish, like by parish council, dedicated some money and some, I guess, some guidelines really, or just sort of not so much lacks of development rules, but helped and spurred along some development like along the Metairie Road corridor. We've really seen some positive growth along there.
There's certainly been an effort. I mean, there's a similar effort to revitalize Fat City, not necessarily to make it the Fat City of yesteryear, but to make it a new Fat City that is much more family friendly than, say, the old famous Fat City. And exactly what you spoke to a moment ago, with an aging population, the goal of many parish officials, I think Blake would agree, is to bring in a younger demographic, and you have to sort of offer the sorts of things that young families need. And so I think you're seeing a lot of efforts by parish officials in Jefferson to do exactly that, to figure out what that is, and then to do it. There are also similar housing stock efforts, for example, on the West Bank.
Where would those families go if they don't want to be in New Orleans, and if they're not satisfied with Jefferson? Are they going to St. Tammany? Are you taking them away?
Yeah, I
Or
think
St.
so.
Charles.
Yeah, St. Charles, but they're moving
Even
to Jefferson,
Tangipahoa.
too. Anecdotally, we hear that.
I mean, it's the St. Tammany problem, the St. Tammany situation. Again, St. Charles has a very good school system, and that is a headline issue for many young families or people who are considering starting families. And so you see a lot of discussion about this within the Jefferson Parish school system, I think is
Right,
awesome.
Blake, let's have you touch on that. In terms of the Jefferson Parish school system, what are they focusing on, and how are they doing?
Yeah, well, I actually think, their last scorecard, they sort of touted their growth from sort of making up gains from that they lost in the coronavirus pandemic. They're actually seeing, and Faimon's covered this quite a bit, and I think we're probably going to see more of this in the coming years. They're actually facing this similar problem that I mentioned earlier of right-sizing their school system, and so you're seeing them having to sort of close down certain schools and consolidate it with other schools, and of course that's very a very emotional issue when you have alumni and you have your deep ties to where you went to school, but you hear the school board members talking about there being needing to sort of right-size that infrastructure, and a lot of that came to the forefront with sort of the damage from Hurricane Ida, sort of realizing how much property they have, that how much essentially liabilities they have there.
Right, and also beautification too. I think we talked about Metairie Road, but Veterans Boulevard. Over these past years, we've seen improvements, and with sculptures along the median, and some improvement also with newer businesses in terms of setback and everything. So they're making an effort.
Yes,
Definitely making an effort. Thanks a lot.
And they're doing more along the lakefront too, like with those natural trails and all that. It's really nice.
Yeah, that's another plan for the future too. Is that old Bucktown Park area? The plans to really expand that. That's very pleasant over there. That's really nice.
Yeah, that's a big initiative of Councilwoman Jennifer Van Rinken, who, if there is no mayor of Metairie, but the parish council members in Jefferson Parish have a significant amount of power, and that's sort of her district. And so if there would be a mayor of Metairie, it would likely be the parish council member there. So. But also sort of just going back to the lakefront development in Kenner, you've seen some of that as well, the Treasure Chest Casino moving onto land, and then there's been quite a few efforts to sort of revitalize some of the boat launches out there, and then some bigger projects, but unclear how far along those are going to go.
Okay, we'll see how it all goes. Thanks a lot, Blake. Faimon, over to you. Now, rural, our rural Louisiana, particularly in our region and rural areas, what are we seeing? When we talk about rural, what are we talking about, really? Give me an example of some of the rural towns and villages or whatever that you cover and take a look at.
That's a great question. I will tell you that one of the great things about rural, the word rural is only defined by what it is not. The census and most federal agencies define urban, and then they say everything else is rural. And so there's no sort of uniform thing you can say about rural areas across the country. And that's certainly true for Louisiana. Within technically rural areas, you have smaller cities, and you also have vast tracts of open farmland or swamp or things like that. Within our area, I mean, much of Washington Parish is considered rural.
Parts of Tammany too.
Parts of Tammany, yeah, and it all depends on the federal agency or the local agency you're using for your definition of rural. But parts of Tammany are very rural, obviously. Jefferson, even some people would consider parts of Jefferson, especially Lafitte, Lower Lafitte, Grand Isle. Those areas are rural. St. Charles, St. John, St. James, you've got rural sections. And then
Reminds me of the judge who wanted to explain pornography, and he says you can't define it, but you know it when you see it.
Right, that's right. And that's what it boils down to. You have to, the state held a series of meetings, rural revitalization meetings, and one of the first questions somebody asked was, what is rural? And there was a state economic development official, and he just kind of laughed. He said, depends on what grant you're trying to get. So
these rural...
I mean, the canal in Carrollton is not rural. We know that. I mean, there's areas we can say, this is rural.
Right.
So these rural areas, however we define them or whatever, what sort of pressures are they facing right now, particularly residents like farmers in the rural areas?
Yeah, sure. So rural areas overall are facing depopulation, like every rural area across the country, a smaller population. People are leaving. Economically mobile people are leaving. And so what's left behind are people who, for whatever reason, can't leave, or and it generally leads to a smaller tax base. And so it becomes a struggle for local agencies, infrastructure, all those things. In regards to farmers, Louisiana has a very sort of vibrant farming sector, as we know. It stretches really around the state. This year in particular has been very tough for a lot of farmers. The year started with high commodity prices, which is good, but at the same time, high input costs, which include things like fertilizer and fuel, diesel. The price of oil was affecting these guys. They were paying in some cases double, even triple. A lot of fertilizer is made in Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, events there are affecting that. There's also a lot of farm commodities that come out of those areas. So for a long time, Louisiana farmers were thinking they were going to have a bumper year. Then we had a very dry summer, which was tough on many. And then in July and August, we had torrential rains across the state. Some areas got like 17 inches in just a couple of days. And there was a lot of crops, cotton and soybeans especially, that were getting ready to come in and were largely damaged. So the farmers who thought they were going to get great prices for those crops found mills or buyers who wouldn't pay the price that they were hoping to get, that they needed to get, in fact. And so it's been a tough year for Louisiana farmers. And the governor's recently asked for a federal emergency disaster declaration for Louisiana farmers.
And so quickly, I want to touch on one area that we've heard about, here in this urban center is the problems that Bogalusa has been having in terms of crime.
Yeah, Bogalusa, like rural areas across the country, but especially in Louisiana, has seen a real spike in crime. They've had more than 60 shootings this year, 8 murders, which is the highest number in at least 3 or 4 decades. It's increasingly young people. It's been a very difficult problem. Obviously, you guys probably remember just a few weeks ago outside a football game, there was a shootout during the homecoming game for Bogalusa High School. 18 to 20 shots fired, a 15-year-old victim.
Yeah.
And so...
What's happening there? What's it?
Well...
Why is this happening right now?
I think it's a large set of circumstances.
But the mayor was quick to point out that these weren't people from Bogalusa.
Yeah, although 2 of the people who had warrants issued for him were from Bogalusa. The victim had a Covington address, and one of the shooters had a Baton Rouge address, and so it's years and years of societal problems, economic stagnation. The mill there, which is still functioning and still employs a lot of people, employs far less people than it did 30, 40 years ago. The city is half the size it was at its heyday. It has a standalone school system that struggles with a shrinking tax base to update facilities and so on. It's a complex problem.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, Faimon. And you wanted to touch on Orleans Parish just a little bit too.
Yeah. Well, Orleans Parish. I mean, we know all the wonderful things about it, but and of course the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems is crime. But the other thing is that from time to time, somebody comes out with a study saying, what's wrong with New Orleans is that it doesn't have enough manufacturing. It says we're relying too much on tourism, we need more manufacturing. And it's true, but the thing is, it's hard to get. I mean, nationwide, there's not that much new manufacturing going on. But the thing that's never been quite figured out is what to do with eastern New Orleans. Because there's this huge stretch of land out there, and then we have the space program, and there's something going to the moon that was manufactured partly there, but still there's a lot there, and there used to be all these dreams of all these manufacturing plants, and I think Renault Automobiles was going to come, and then they could put the new automobiles in a barge and bring them up the Industrial Canal, and it just never happened. And of course, we see the Six Flags thing; it never happened. Just imagine if that area could be developed, what it could do. I mean, that could be just a whole new population and a whole new industry. But I just don't. It has geographic problems. It's hard to get to, and if you can go there, then why don't you just go over to Slidell and go and go to Think Tammany Parish.
Well, certainly in Orleans Parish, tourism industry is it's going pretty strong. I mean, it's rebounded really pretty well after being largely shut down during the pandemic. People still want to come to the city of New Orleans, enjoy what it has to offer. So
yeah,
pretty good news.
Then they might want to go home right after that, but still.
Yeah, but
the charms are still there. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's tourism that keeps the charms. I mean, without tourism, the fine restaurants and the museums couldn't be open.
And the music, and there's the culture. Okay, we're going to go quickly around the table now and start with you, E, about outlook, the future outlook, something maybe positive for each of these areas?
Well, something really good that happened in New Orleans during the past year that didn't get anywhere near the attention it deserves, was the voters passed a millage to fund early childhood education, to increase the funding for early childhood education. It's going to be like a few $1,000,000 a year, and they have a big program to do that. It's a long-range solution, but it's really the kind of thing you need to do, that you really need to start educating and getting these kids at that age. And so maybe in terms of the long range, we took a big step.
Okay. Blake, real quick to you.
Yeah, I think something that will be interesting to watch is going forward is that the parish is it's a little boring, but revamping its industrial zoning rules, some of which were built in the.
This is Jefferson we're talking about.
Right, some of which were put in place in the 50s and 60s, and it just really gets down to the core question of sort of what should this parish look like moving forward, and so you're seeing a lot of discussions right now, sort of push and pull between. Sort of community activists who are concerned about environmental issues and business groups who are, concerned about economic development.
Okay.
So,
all right, thanks a lot. St. Tammany, over to you.
Well, interestingly enough, I think there's some of the same things going on. I think that there is an effort to maybe do a better job of not impacting our floodplains. There's some studies going on. We'll see where those go. But at least it seems like it's more part of the conversation that we need to look at how we keep from ruining what brought everybody over in the first place.
In the first place, right.
Yeah.
That's why people went to St. Tammany, for its pine trees, right? and for its lovely living. Over to you, Faimon.
I would just say that for the state's rural areas, the recent awarding of a lot of gumbo grants, it's millions of dollars to help bring broadband internet into rural communities, I think is something that can help begin. It's not a solution to every problem or a panacea, but it is something that can begin to help slow the decline or the slide of many of these rural areas by offering some of the same amenities that those of us in areas where it's easy to get high-speed internet, including TV, but also highlighted by the pandemic, education, remote work. These things that are all enabled by the internet are not available to many people in our rural communities.
And it's not only the future, it's now.
That's right.
Yeah, so these folks really do need it. Real quick, the population boom that we saw in St. Tammany post-Katrina, did it make it up to Washington Parish, would you say?
No, I don't think it really did. Maybe a little bit, but it certainly stayed outside of Bogalusa, for instance, and Franklinton. It may have filtered through a little bit, but certainly not like it did in eastern and western St. Tammany.
All right, guys. Great discussion talking about our region, how we're doing today, and what we're going to look like tomorrow. Thanks a lot for being here around our table, and thank you all for joining us too. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.